Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I wanted to talk on Marco Rubio's recent speech that he made at the Munich conference and the implications thereof. So without further ado, let's get into it. Marco Rubio has made what I would call somewhat of a historic speech in Munich today. I have to say, by and large, from the little snippet that I'm going to play and analyze, I agree in the most part with everything he said. I think that as a continent, Europe has pivoted in a direction that is completely alien to its founding policies, to its original value set, and I think that this path towards insanity can only lead to, if not the dissolution of the European Union and the breakup of NATO, as well as the dissolution of society as we know it, law and ordered society within Europe as we know it, and Europe being reduced to somewhat of a basket case in terms of world geopolitics. I'm certain most of you out there will argue that Europe is already in the embraces of being that basket case indeed. So let's have a look at what Marco Rubio said, and I will give you my take on it. Now, a simple overview of what he said was that the Americans do not want to abandon Europe. They believe in Europe. Indeed, America is a product of Europe. And to all those points, I agree. I think he is 100% correct. However, the writing between the lines is that the value system in Europe has to change. And we keep coming back to this point. I keep mentioning it in my videos. Donald Trump has said it at Davos. Europe has become unrecognizable. Europe has to walk back on a lot of the policies it has promulgated within the last 10 years, which he sees it as being detrimental to Europe's survival. Now, I argue that he is 100% correct. If you look at it from the point of his departure regarding this issue, Europe is unrecognizable and it has to embrace a reduction of all those policies that it has promulgated in the last 10 years, simply because the face of Europe is changing and it is changing rapidly. However, I can tell you that from living within Europe, living within the United Kingdom itself, those policies are disastrous. I am seeing things in the United Kingdom that I never in my wildest dreams could have imagined. You know, when countries in Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, North and South America look at Europe and see what it has become and actively and outwardly say this is not what we want to embrace, then you have a problem. And the problem we've had with the current European and UK governments, as well as the one that was in the administration in the United States during the Biden era, the Obama era, the Clinton era, is that they realize that their policies do not appeal to the masses. So rather than amending their policies, they would rather try and amend society and shove down society's throat the values that they wish society would embrace. Now, these value systems that Europe and a lot of these Christian, Islamic nations have embraced over centuries, these are policies that have been deeply rooted and inculcated into their populace over thousands of years. These administrations wish to undo that within a mere 5 to 10 years. And that is not the answer. You know, you see it with this idiot Sadiq Khan. His policies in London are absolutely disastrous and horrendous. But rather than having the backbone, the balls, the integrity to stand up and say, I was wrong, I made a mistake, what I'm embracing is cultural suicide. No, he doubles down and then goes on the war path with anybody that doesn't agree with him. He then goes and promulgates more insane policies to try and outdo the ones that he's done. Because rather than address the issue at hand, which is the failing policy he put in place in the first place, he doubles down on that policy, making it somebody else's issue. So what he's doing, he's effectively embracing victimhood and saying that it's because of something else the policy hasn't worked, rather than saying the policy hasn't worked because it's a failed policy. No, the policy hasn't worked because it hasn't been implemented properly, the public are not ready for the policy is not radical enough, and you keep going further. The knife crime in London is obscene. It's on levels that are unprecedented. Rather than addressing it, it's somebody else's problem. It's the problem of the knives. The knives are at fault. The kids are at fault. Look at the society you have caused. Look at the moral decay and rot you have introduced into society. Look at what you've done to those kids' parents. That you've now got kids growing up in homes where the parents are absent because they have to work 2 and 3 jobs a day to just try and put food on the table. And rather than say, my policies were wrong and they've resulted in this, no. It's the parents, it's the kids, it's the knives, it's the country, it's thousands of years of failed policies, rather than just saying, I was wrong. And how can we sort it out? People will respect you more. People will hold you in high regard. At the moment, this idiot, nobody even knows how he got into power. I have yet to meet a single person that I come across the color spectrum, across the nationality spectrum, whether they're foreigners, whether they're ethnic Brits, whatever, that have voted for him. Yet he clings on to power and keeps promulgating these disastrous policies, all the while cheered on by a group of bigger morons that make him think that he's doing something good. I say to this idiot, you and your family, you all are protected. You'll travel around with armed security. You have wealth at your disposal. You have the Met at your disposal. Talk to those parents whose kids have been murdered. Talk to those parents whose kids have been abused. You refuse to address the grooming gangs issue. You refuse to address their existence in London. Talk to those parents that are affected. When we elect idiots like this with zero empathy, you might as well just go and elect a cardboard box or a wooden plank into office, because it has more empathy and more humanity in it than some of these soulless individuals that we put forward. Absolutely greedy, filthy and corrupt, and will do anything to see the nation that once took them in destroyed to nothing. Rather than be grateful and say, I came to the United Kingdom and it gave me something that I couldn't get somewhere else, and I'm forever grateful for it. And let me help build on that so more less fortunate people can come in and benefit of a system. No, you will rather tear that system down, bring it to its knees, because you are a traitor that is lying within. And that is the sad truth. And to sum it up, that is essentially what Marco Rubio is saying. He is saying thousands of years of policy, thousands of years of culture and heritage that has shaped Europe and the civilization we have come to know is now being abandoned by the wayside for an insanity and a madness that the world does not understand. Yet it continues to be promulgated. So his message is clear. The United States is charting a path. You're more than welcome to join. If, however, you do decide to join, these are the rules and regulations that you need to play by in order to make sure that we are successful in our endeavors. If not, chart your own course, but be responsible for it. The day the proverbial shit hits the fan, do not then turn to the United States and ask them for help, because the grave you're in is the grave you've dug. Or alternatively, follow us and we can restore the pride and glory to Europe that it once had. He says that ultimately our destiny will always be intertwined with yours. And there was thunderous applause from the crowd.
And we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive. Because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. Because we know
once again, you have all these well-wishers sitting there, these European leaders that, they're on this magic carpet ride, high on hubris, thinking that everything is hunky-dory with the United States. And every now and then, you get a shock and a jolt to the system. But this thunderous applause, again, lulls them into a false sense of security. Wake up and realize that the man is telling you, yes, it can be that way, but you have to change. We don't want to change. We continuously perpetuate this madness. And then every now and then when they try and pacify us because they think, maybe sending Vance down would be too harsh. Maybe Trump speaking would be too harsh. So let's send somebody who's a bit more moderate like Marco Rubio. Maybe he can wean you away with good with good words and sympathy and empathy for you. Because between Vance and Trump, it's going to be tough love. But it doesn't work, because the moment you get somebody like Rubio come down and speak like this, you get this thunderous applause and everybody takes home from this meeting, the United States is with us. They don't want to leave us. They need us for nothing. We need them more than they need us. They're trying every bit to persuade us that this is the way forward. I'll tell you, the day of reckoning arrives when they dump us because we fail to revise our policies and look at what they're saying. And then it's going to be too late. Then it's going to be too late because we wasted all these opportunities. And history is going to bear them out. They're going to say, look, we gave you the opportunities. We made the speeches. We spoke to you in front of the public. We spoke to you behind closed doors. You still embrace this madness. And don't forget, all the while, the Americans are actively seeking to destabilize these current European and UK regimes because they are disastrous. The Americans see our current regimes as absolutely disastrous. And I can't agree with them more. There are a lot of European governments, and our UK government included, that are on this utopian ideal that just does not exist. It does not exist. It's a parasitic relationship where they're allowing the parasite to consume the host without the host even bothering to put up a glimmer of a fight. Marco Rubio talks about national security. He says this conference is largely about national security. And then he goes on to say, you cannot expect an army to go out there and defend you because you ask it to go out there and defend you. An army defends a nation because it cares for its nation. It believes in the principles of its nation. It believes in the values of its nation. He says armies fight for a way of life. They fight for a people. That is the fundamental question. What do armies fight for? They do not fight because you go out there and tell them to fight. They fight for something they believe in, essentially. That's what he's saying.
National security, which this conference is largely about, is not merely a series of technical questions. How much we spend on defense or where, how we deploy it, these are important questions. They are. But they are not the fundamental one. The fundamental question we must answer at the outset is, what exactly are we defending? Because armies do not fight for abstractions. Armies fight for a people. Armies fight for a nation. Armies fight for a way of life. And that is what we are defending.
He's saying they fight in principles. They fight for principles that they believe in, a way of life they believe in. Now, I know of no soldier that will want to go out and currently defend the situation we have. Well, no soldier certainly worthy of their salt. Because there is one thing and one thing alone that rallies a person in the army, and that is a strong sense of patriotism and nationalism. And currently, with these current regimes, well, up until recently, the moment you were nationalistic or patriotic, you were seen as extreme far right. Now that they want to go and take on the Russians, that far right has to now be embraced. Oh, we need you to go in. So, these idiots are more than happy to send somebody else's kids and mobilize them to go and fight a war. But the policies you put in place, the policies you're asking them to defend. Watch one of my videos where I spoke about the conversation I overheard in the cigar lounge between two young English gentlemen who were brothers. And how, this kid said that he was continuously told that being a white male, he was bad. Everything his ancestors did was wrong. And now he's being asked to go and fight for his country. And he said, hell no, I'm not going to. Because if I'm that bad, why should I go and make the ultimate sacrifice for it? And this is what Marco Rubio is saying. You cannot embolden an army to go and stand on the front line and make the ultimate sacrifice for a policy that he does not believe in. And he's saying, the policies we're asking you to fight for are policies that are tried and tested. You've had them in place for thousands of years. It's what your culture has been based upon. It's what your culture has grown around. So again, there's a big divergence between where the United States is and wants to go and where Europe currently is and is heading. He talks about the Sistine Chapel. He talks about, the architecture in Florence. He talks about Mozart. He says these are things that have been produced from the European continent, things that you are proud of, celebrated, things that you hold dear. You're prepared to abandon all this. He says you have it in you to become great again. Why do you wish to not embrace that? Rather, just move forward on this path to destructiveness.
And that is what we are defending. A great civilization that has every reason to be proud of its history, confident of its future, and aims to always be the master of its own economic and political destiny. It was here, in Europe, where the ideas that planted the seeds of liberty that changed the world were born. It was here, in Europe, which gave the world the rule of law, the universities, and the scientific revolution. It was this continent that produced the genius of Mozart and Beethoven, of Dante and Shakespeare, of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And this is the place where the vaulted ceilings of the Sistine Chapel and the towering spires of the great cathedral in Cologne, they testify not just to the greatness of our past or to a faith in God that inspired these marvels. They foreshadow the wonders that await us in our future.
Every time I listen to this speech, I keep thinking that what he is saying is, it's almost like America is making a heartfelt plea, a genuine heartfelt plea to the European nations. Look at where you are, look at who you are, look at how far you've deviated from where you originally were and what your ancestors stood for. And it seems to me it's a genuine heartfelt plea. I think, when you look at the way in which this rhetoric has escalated and the point it's at, if you look at it in terms of normal human relations, when an argument gets to this level, there's not much more after this. There's not much more after this but a severing of the ties. And when that severing of the ties comes about, it becomes so clinical, so, it's almost like cauterizing a wound and cutting it off and saying, that's it. It's an amputation of ties between the United States and Europe. And the problem with that is when you look at general life experience, and when you have a cauterization of these types of ties in this manner, it takes a long time and a lot of forgiving and goodwill on both sides for those ties to be restored. And will they ever be restored to that level again? I don't know. But what happens in the interim? What happens in the interim is extremely dangerous, because adversaries take advantage of that, and adversaries within seek to drive that wedge even further, breaking up the society. And I can tell you, Europe is not short of adversaries, external and internal, that wish to see its decline. And these morons that we have put in power continue to play to that tune. Whether they wholeheartedly embrace it or whether one day they're going to wake up, it reminds me of that scene in The Lord of the Rings where that king in the White City or whatever it was eating his piece of chicken and just couldn't see what was happening around. His sons had died, until he ran to the tower, and he looked over the castle wall and saw the army amassing at his gates. And then in that split second of sanity, all that lunacy had disappeared. But then it came back with a resounding thump, because the reality hit him, but it was simultaneously followed by a sense of defeat. Insurmountable defeat. I am not able to achieve any victory because I have reached this point and allowed it to get here. And now it's too late. They're at my gates and they're going to crush me. And he already threw the towel in. And that is what I see in Europe.
My line has ended.
Rohan has deserted us. Theoden's betrayed me.
Abandon your post! Flee! Flee for your lives!
I don't know whether these politicians we've elected are drunk on that hubris and lunacy, and whether that defining moment will arrive and they will voluntarily walk away and say that, we've been the architects of our own destruction, or whether they'll continue. Because right now, I can't see a difference between an external traitor. I would say, rather, if you say the Russians are the enemy at the gates, I would rather face the Russians at the gates than face this enemy that we have within. Because it is sadistic. It is sickening to think that we can do this to ourselves, or the people we've elected have allowed it to get to this level. He says, together we can industrialize and we can reclaim. Again, he's throwing a line of hope. He's saying to you, it's not over. It might seem that way, but it's not over. You still have a chance. Make a U-turn. Let's do this together. He says, industrialization was not a bad thing. However, this madness that has been embraced, this globalization, where you've culled your own communities. You go onto YouTube, look at videos, these younger generation kids make about, places up north, the coal mines, the steel mines, the communities that are decimated, the drug infestation, the poverty, the prostitution, the loss of hope. The worst thing you can do to a human being, is remove their hope. Because as long as there's no hope, their will to continue is gone. And here's a man who's saying to you, let's build this together. We'll do it with you. Now, I don't know how much more clearer it can be.
Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence. And the loss of our supply chain sovereignty was not a function of a prosperous and healthy system of global trade. It was foolish. It was a foolish but voluntary transformation of our economy that left us dependent on others for our needs and dangerously vulnerable to crisis.
You know, he talks about we must take control of our borders. We must know who comes in, how many do we need them. And, you know, you can't be any more correct on the matter. You want people that share your values. You want people that are prepared to contribute to a system. You don't want people that are going to come in and ride around on bicycles and motorbikes, delivering food on 0-hour contracts, earning money that is then not taxable, while at the same time being put up in accommodation paid for by the taxpayer, food paid for by the taxpayer, a weekly stipend paid for by the taxpayer, families brought in. I know of an incident where a guy's here with his 90-year-old mother, you know, and, you know, the NHS has to provide. Now, yeah, it's a humanitarian gesture, but it's something we cannot afford. We just cannot afford it. He hasn't contributed to the system. His mother hasn't contributed to the system. We've taken them both in. He's collecting food from the food bank and telling the people at the food bank, I don't want this can of tuna. I want that one instead because that is what we prefer. We don't like this. You know, man, come on. You're given food for free. Appreciate it. Be grateful. On top of that, you bring your entire family here and you let them go in and get free medical care while our own pensioners that have contributed their entire life to the system are now being let down. You know, on what planet does that make sense? If there's a shortage of doctors, you bring doctors in. If there's a shortage of doctors, the answer is not to bring in delivery people. You always, as a human being, want to strive to make things better. This is the first time I can honestly say in my life, I'm sitting and watching in front of me societies openly embrace a culture and an indoctrination that is leading to their systematic degradation and downfall. And all the while, they're trying to justify and tell you that what they're doing is right. Don't get me wrong. Immigration is a good thing. You know, one of the proudest moments I ever had was I was taking an Uber. The driver was from Afghanistan. And we were talking in the car and he said to me, he explained to me, he got into the UK. You know, he smuggled himself across in a truck from France. And the truck got through UK immigration, got onto the motorway. He had no idea. He was in the back of the truck, where it was going, what was happening. Until the truck stopped, he realized that it had stopped somewhere and there was an opportunity for him to get out. So he jumped out of the truck and he said all he could see was this open motorway and farmland on either side. He ran immediately into the fields and just continued running because he's terrified. And he told me he happened to stumble upon a house and he later realized he was up north somewhere, Yorkshire, down that area. And he gets to this house, knocks on the door frantically, and inside is an elderly English gentleman and his wife. They open the door, and the humility and humanity of these two individuals, the empathy that they showed him. They opened the door, and rather than calling the police, rather than panicking or chasing him, you know, the first thing they said to him was, please come in. There was a communication problem, but they understood that this man needed help. They fed him, they clothed him, they let him have a shower, they gave him a room to stay in for the night, and then they arranged for him to be taken to Croydon to the Home Office to go and get his papers processed. Now, at any point in that interaction, they could have phoned the police, they could have viewed him as a threat, they could have said this is wrong what he has done. They took pity on him and they helped him. Today the man is an Uber driver. His wife is here, his family are here, they are in schools. And he said to me, he said, I am a Muslim. He said, I am a Muslim. I am a strong, staunch Muslim. I believe in my religion. He said, but there is one thing I will never ever forget and go back on. He said, when my country was persecuting me, I struggled. I got through to the UK. He said, when I got here, I was shown nothing but kindness, nothing but empathy. He said, and I can tell you till my last breath in my body, I will never ever forget what this country and the people of this country have done for me. He said, I will give my life in a heartbeat fighting for this country because it's such a great country. He said, the United Kingdom is such a great country. It gave me a sense of purpose. It gave me, he said, my kids are here, they are in school, they are doing well, and they are going to go on to become professionals. He said, and I've taught them to be grateful and appreciative for what this country has done. So I'm saying to you, when I speak like this, when we make these videos, we are not criticizing immigration. We are saying that it needs to be controlled. We are saying that there are genuine people out there that need help. But I'm telling you, when you open your borders and you have no clue to what is coming in, make no mistake, there are those that are coming in with a heavy heart and a heart to destroy. And you're going to wake up one morning and it's going to be too late. Because you're going to be in the minority. There's going to be chaos and turmoil all around. And your country is going to be usurped from underneath your feet. And then there is nobody to blame but the politicians and the public that voted these morons in. So I'm saying again, now is the time. Make the stand and change the system. Because if you don't, you're leaving nothing by way of legacy for those coming after you to enjoy. It's going to be a barren wasteland of lawlessness and corruption. Rubio says it's not hate. You know, it's not being Islamophobic. It's not being anti-Semitic. It's not being Hindu-phobic. It's nothing of the sort. It's a simple policy. If you need somebody, you get them in. You can only take people in if you're in a position to look after them. Currently, we're not even in a position to look after our own. So how does this insanity matter? Record levels of illegal immigration. And we continue to fight for more. And our governments are impotent because if they don't agree with it, they feel it's a it's a voting base they've lost. To hell with the voting base. Do what is right for the country. You'll get short-term losses but long-term gains. And you'll go down in history as being remembered as the politicians that came in and did the hard work that nobody wanted to do, but you saved the country.
I come with tidings in this dark hour, and with counsel. War is coming. The enemy is on your doorstep. As steward, you are charged with the defense of this city. Where are Gondor's armies? You still have friends. You are not alone in this fight. Send word to Theoden of Rohan. Light the beacons.
You think you are wise, Mithrandir. Yet for all your subtleties, you have not wisdom. Do you think the eyes of the White Tower are blind? I have seen more than you know. With your left hand, you would use me as a shield against Mordor, and with your right, you would seek to supplant me. I know who rides with Theoden of Rohan. Oh yes, word has reached my ears of this Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and I tell you now, I will not bow to this ranger from the north, last of a ragged house long bereft of lordship.
Authority is not given to you to deny the return of the king, steward.
The rule of Gondor is mine, and no others.
It's probably a 15-20 minute clip I'm going to put up. It's going to be a long video, but I urge you, listen to the speech, because There is nothing in here that he is saying that is untrue. He's laying it all bare and saying, this is who you are. This is what you've done to help shape the United States of America. So, you have greatness within you. I said this in my other videos. We can return and we can let some of that greatness shine again. But there must be a will to want to do it. And currently, with the current administration we have in the UK and in Europe, I don't think that it is. I think that we've moved so far away from our fundamental values that it's actually an embarrassment to embrace the values of old. Listen, I'm a Hindu. Religion plays no part in this. I moved to a Christian country and I would live here 100% under these laws and rules that have built and shaped this country, because those rules create a sense of order and purpose in the country. What I see happening now is sad and shocking. It's got nothing to do with religion. It's just that I agree with these values that the country was built on. I agree with what was said. People keep talking about the British and the slave trade. Do you know that William Wilberforce was the one who was responsible for helping end the slave trade? Do you know that when the British ships landed in Turkey, they made threats to the Turkish government saying, end slavery now, because the next time our ships dock in your harbors, in your ports, and British soldiers are allowed off, we will allow them off, and if they see slavery in your markets, don't hold us responsible for the actions that they're going to take. We will not hold back our soldiers. Do you know that the Arabs were responsible for the most amount of slaves being traded from Africa out into the Arabian Peninsula? Do you know that the Arabs transporting slaves out from Africa was one of the most inhumane systems known, because when these slaves were taken into these Arab and Turkish nations, the males were castrated so that they could not have kids. These things are conveniently swept aside. When you talk of the slave trade, the first people to be put out there is the British. How sad. How sad. Yes, they did engage in the slave trade. But let's talk about the fact that they also stopped the slave trade. Let's talk about the fact that they were not the most prolific perpetrators of the slave trade. The Arabs were. But it's conveniently forgotten. So again, let's speak those truths that are uncomfortable, because they are truths after all. The pursuit of the truth is the only thing that should matter. And if we pick and choose the truths we want to have out there, shame on us. So once again, thank you for taking your time to spend with us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And please remember to like, share and subscribe, as it helps our channel to grow and it helps us with the algorithm. And one more point, please, I urge you to watch the entirety of the speech by Marco Rubio that I've put up, because it's for me, I feel it's a really good speech, and it's something that will help you understand where the Americans are coming from. Read between the lines and see if you can spot what I'm saying. The Americans don't want to abandon Europe, but the current posturing within Europe is forcing that abandonment. And history will go on to prove that the Americans under this administration wanted nothing but to cooperate with Europe. The values didn't align. Europe was not prepared to change. Europe is a subservient in this relationship. So the onus is on them to make some overtures towards change. They refuse. They still continue to believe in this free love policy that they're running around and promulgating. And I'm telling you now, it is going to have disastrous consequences. Long term. Short term, we can see it already. The world is looking at Europe and saying, oh no, we don't want to become like the UK. We do not want to become like France and Germany. And this is now. Can you imagine 20, 50 years later of continued discontinued policy implementation. Can you imagine another 10 years of Sadiq Khan, Keir Starmer, Ursula von der Leyen, Macron, Merz? This madness. Can you imagine another 10 years, 20 years of that? This continent will be burning. This continent will be burning. It's already on fire.
And we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive. Because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. Because we know that the fate of Europe will never be irrelevant to our own. National security, which this conference is largely about, is not merely a series of technical questions. How much we spend on defense or where, how we deploy it, these are important questions. They are. But they are not the fundamental one. The fundamental question we must answer at the outset is, what exactly are we defending? Because armies do not fight for abstractions. Armies fight for a people. Armies fight for a nation. Armies fight for a way of life. And that is what we are defending. A great civilization that has every reason to be proud of its history, confident of its future, and aims to always be the master of its own economic and political destiny. It was here, in Europe, where the ideas that planted the seeds of liberty that changed the world were born. It was here, in Europe, which gave the world the rule of law, the universities, and the scientific revolution. It was this continent that produced the genius of Mozart and Beethoven, of Dante and Shakespeare, of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And this is the place where the vaulted ceilings of the Sistine Chapel and the towering spires of the great cathedral in Cologne, they testify not just to the greatness of our past or to a faith in God that inspired these marvels. They foreshadow the wonders that await us in our future. But only if we are unapologetic in our heritage and proud of this common inheritance can we together begin the work of envisioning and shaping our economic and our political future. Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence. And the loss of our supply chain sovereignty was not a function of a prosperous and healthy system of global trade. It was foolish. It was a foolish but voluntary transformation of our economy that left us dependent on others for our needs and dangerously vulnerable to crisis. Mass migration isn't some fringe concern of little consequence. It was and continues to be a crisis which is transforming and destabilizing societies all across the West. Together, we can reindustrialize our economies and rebuild our capacity to defend our people. But the work of this new alliance should not be focused just on military cooperation and reclaiming the industries of the past. It should also be focused on together advancing our mutual interests in new frontiers, unshackling our ingenuity, our creativity, and the dynamic spirit to build a new Western century. Commercial space travel and cutting-edge artificial intelligence, industrial automation and flex manufacturing, creating a Western supply chain for critical minerals not vulnerable to extortion from other powers, and a unified effort to compete for market share in the economies of the global South. Together, we can not only take back control of our own industries and supply chains, we can prosper in the areas that will define the 21st century. But we must also gain control of our national borders. Controlling who and how many people enter our countries, this is not an expression of xenophobia. It is not hate. It is a fundamental act of national sovereignty. And the failure to do so is not just an abdication of one of our most basic duties owed to our people. It is an urgent threat to the fabric of our societies and the survival of our civilization itself. And finally, we can no longer place the so-called global order above the vital interests of our people and our nations. We do not need to abandon the system of international cooperation we authored, and we don't need to dismantle the global institutions of the old order that together we built. But these must be reformed. These must be rebuilt. For example, the United Nations still has tremendous potential to be a tool for good in the world. But we cannot ignore that today, on the most pressing matters before us, it has no answers and has played virtually no role. It could not solve the war in Gaza. Instead, it was American leadership that freed captives from barbarians and brought about a fragile truce. It has not solved the war in Ukraine. It took American leadership in partnership with many of the countries here today just to bring the two sides to the table in search of a still elusive peace. It was powerless to constrain the nuclear program of radical Shia clerics in Tehran. That required 14 bombs dropped with precision from American B-2 bombers. And it was unable to address the threat to our security from a narco-terrorist dictator in Venezuela. Instead, it took American special forces to bring this fugitive to justice. In a perfect world, all of these problems and more would be solved by diplomats and strongly worded resolutions. But we do not live in a perfect world, and we cannot continue to allow those who blatantly and openly threaten our citizens and endanger our global stability to shield themselves behind abstractions of international law which they themselves routinely violate. This is the path that President Trump and the United States has embarked upon. It is the path we ask you here in Europe to join us on. It is a path we have walked together before and hope to walk together again. For 5 centuries, before the end of the Second World War, the West had been expanding. Its missionaries, its pilgrims, its soldiers, its explorers pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires extending out across the globe. But in 1945, for the first time since the age of Columbus, it was contracting. Europe was in ruins. Half of it lived behind an iron curtain, and the rest looked like it would soon follow. The great Western empires had entered into terminal decline, accelerated by godless communist revolutions and by anti-colonial uprisings that would transform the world and drape the red hammer and sickle across vast swaths of the map in the years to come. Against that backdrop, then as now, many came to believe that the West's age of dominance had come to an end, and that our future was destined to be a faint and feeble echo of our past. But together, our predecessors recognized that decline was a choice, and it was a choice they refused to make. This is what we did together once before, and this is what President Trump and the United States want to do again now, together with you. And this is why we do not want our allies to be weak, because that makes us weaker. We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who together with us are willing and able to defend it. And this is why we do not want allies to rationalize the broken status quo rather than reckon with what is necessary to fix it. For we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. We do not seek to separate, but to revitalize an old friendship and renew the greatest civilization in human history. What we want is a reinvigorated alliance that recognizes that what has ailed our societies is not just a set of bad policies, but a malaise of hopelessness and complacency. An alliance is the alliance that we want is one that is not paralyzed into inaction by fear, fear of climate change, fear of war, fear of technology. Instead, we want an alliance that boldly races into the future. And the only fear we have is the fear of the shame of not leaving our nations prouder, stronger, and wealthier for our children. An alliance ready to defend our people, to safeguard our interests, and to preserve the freedom of action that allows us to shape our own destiny. Not one that exists to operate a global welfare state and atone for the purported sins of past generations. An alliance that does not allow its power to be outsourced, constrained, or subordinated to systems beyond its control. One that does not depend on others for the critical necessities of its national life. And one that does not maintain the polite pretense that our way of life is just one among many, and that asks for permission before it acts. And above all, an alliance based on the recognition that we, the West, have inherited together. What we have inherited together is something that is unique and distinctive and irreplaceable, because this, after all, is the very foundation of the transatlantic bond. Acting together in this way, we will not just help recover a sane foreign policy, it will restore to us a clearer sense of ourselves. It will restore a place in the world. And in so doing, it will rebuke and deter the forces of civilizational erasure that today menace both America and Europe alike. So in a time of headlines heralding the end of the transatlantic era, let it be known and clear to all that this is neither our goal nor our wish. Because for us Americans, our home may be in the Western Hemisphere, but we will always be a child of Europe. Our story began with an Italian explorer whose adventure into the great unknown to discover a new world brought Christianity to the Americas and became the legend that defined the imagination of our pioneer nation. Our first colonies were built by English settlers, to whom we owe not just the language we speak, but the whole of our political and legal system. Our frontiers were shaped by Scots-Irish, that proud, hardy clan from the hills of Ulster that gave us Davy Crockett and Mark Twain and Teddy Roosevelt and Neil Armstrong. Our great Midwestern heartland was built by German farmers and craftsmen who transformed empty plains into a global agricultural powerhouse. And by the way, dramatically upgraded the quality of American beer. Our expansion into the interior followed the footsteps of French fur traders and explorers whose names, by the way, still adorn the street signs and town names all across the Mississippi Valley. Our horses, our ranches, our rodeos, the entire romance of the cowboy archetype that became synonymous with the American West. These were born in Spain. And our largest and most iconic city was named New Amsterdam before it was named New York. And you know that in the year that my country was founded, Lorenzo and Catalina Giraldi lived in Casal Monferrato in the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia. And Jose and Manuela Reina lived in Sevilla, Spain. I don't know what, if anything, they knew about the 13 colonies which had gained their independence from the British Empire. But here's what I'm certain of. They could have never imagined that 250 years later, one of their direct descendants would be back here today on this continent as the chief diplomat of that infant nation. And yet here I am, reminded by my own story that both our histories and our fates will always be linked. Together, we rebuilt a shattered continent in the wake of 2 devastating world wars. When we found ourselves divided once again by the Iron Curtain, the Free West linked arms with the courageous dissidents struggling against tyranny in the East to defeat Soviet communism. We have fought against each other, then reconciled, then fought, then reconciled again. And we have bled and died side by side on battlefields from Kapyong to Kandahar. And I'm here today to leave it clear that America is charting the path for a new century of prosperity, and that once again, we want to do it together with you, our cherished allies and our oldest friends. We want to do it together with you, with a Europe that is proud of its heritage and of its history, with a Europe that has the spirit of creation and liberty that sent ships out into uncharted seas and birthed our civilization, with a Europe that has the means to defend itself and the will to survive. We should be proud of what we achieved together in the last century, but now we must confront and embrace the opportunities of a new one. Because yesterday is over. The future is inevitable. And our destiny together awaits. Thank you.